Hi, my name is Valeska, and today my group and I will be talking about the link between infections and cancer. Cancer is often thought of as a genetic or environmental disease. However, certain infectious agents, like the ones that we'll discuss today in this presentation, can also play a role in cancer development. In this presentation, we'll be introducing the major infection-related cancers with the focus on two significant viruses, which are HPV and Epstein-Barr virus. Now, what are infection-related cancers? Infectious diseases caused by certain viruses, bacteria, and parasites that have been linked to the development of various cancer by causing chronic inflammation, DNA damage, or immune system suppression. Infectious agents include certain viruses, bacteria, and parasites that have been classified in the Report of Carcinogens by National Toxicology Program as Group 1 carcinogens. This means there is sufficient enough evidence to show that these infections can directly cause cancer in humans. Most, if not all, of the infectious agents in this group are listed above. We have Epstein-Barr virus, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, human immunodeficiency virus type, more commonly known as HIV, human papillomavirus, human T-cell lymphotrophic virus type 1, Kaposi sarcoma-associated herpesvirus. We also have Helicobacter pylori and Schistosoma hematobium, which is a parasite. Okay. So here we see some viruses that are linked to different types of cancer. HPV, or human papilloma, is most well known for causing cervical cancer, but it's also linked to oropharyngeal cancer, which is cancer in the throat. HPV and HCV are types of hepatitis viruses that are both connected to liver cancer. Epstein-Barr virus is associated with nasopharyngeal carcinoma, a type of throat cancer, and certain lymphomas. Finally, HTLV1, a virus that affects T cells, can lead to adult T cell leukemia or lymphoma. Here in this diagram, we can see the types of infections and the cancers that they are known for causing. Now, these viruses don't directly cause cancer in everyone, but they can increase the risk, especially when the immune system is weakened or the infection persists over time. This graph here shows the global impact of infections on cancers which have a particularly strong association with infections, with passages responsible for nearly all cases. For example, infections account for nearly all cases of cervical cancer, adult T cell leukemia and lymphoma, and non-cardiostonic cancer. How do infections lead to cancer? So we mentioned inflammation, immune suppression, and DNA alterations. Long-term inflammations lead to an environment high in cytokines and reactive oxygen species, shortly known ROS, which can damage DNA and promote mutations. Some viruses are really good at hiding from our immune system, which allows those infected cells to grow without being stopped. For example, HIV weakens the immune system, so the body becomes more vulnerable to cancers caused by viruses like Kaposi sarcoma or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Viral oncogenes and DNA changes. Certain viruses can also add specific genes into our DNA that can encourage or mess with the genes that normally prevent it. A good example of this is HPV, which produces proteins called E6 and E7, which we'll dive further into later on into this presentation. These proteins stop the body from having the natural defenses work properly, which allow cancer cells to grow. Okay, so let's dive into human papillomavirus. HPV belongs to the papillomatoid family. They are non-enveloped DNA viruses. HPV is the most common sexually transmitted infection worldwide. It is so common that about 80% of sexually active people will be infected with HPV at some point in their life. This is due to the way that it infects through bodily fluid and a lot of times due to unprotected sexual intercourse. To put it into perspective, according to the CDC, around 79 million Americans are currently infected with HPV. A lot don't know it because it can have no symptoms, but it still poses a significant public health concern because of the highest risk strains that can lead to cancer. More than 42 million Americans affected with oncogenic strains of HPV. About 13 million become infected each year. The good news is that the infection is said to be self-limiting, meaning it clears on its own. Around 90% of HPV infections resolve without any treatment, especially the non-oncogenic or low-risk strains that don't cause cancer. So there are over 200 types of HPV, but only 13 high-risk oncogenic strains, which include HPV type 16 and 18. HPV primarily infects cutaneous epithelial cells of the skin, commonly seen on the hands, face, and feet, where it can manifest as benign tumors, often appearing as warts. HPV also infects epithelial cells of mucous membranes, especially in the respiratory tract, including the pharynx, nasal cavities, anus, and genital regions. These symptoms are typically associated with the oncogenic strains such as HPV 16 and 18 rather than the non-oncogenic strains that cause warts. Here we can see HPV and HPV 11 that are more of the non-oncogenic, and these are the general warts that you may see. The oncogenic strains can lead to carcinomas or cancer of epithelial cells. Here we see an infected patient, an infection, a pap smear result of cancerous HPV 16 and 18. So over here is a cytology result from a study titled Prevalence of Type-Specific HPV Infection by Age and Grade of Cervical Cytology. They investigated the prevalence of high-risk strains of HPV among more than 20,000 women within the age range of 20 and 64 years old. So the most common types of HPV were 16, 18, 31, 51, and 52, which were the most prevalent, accounting for 60% of all HRPV infections, and this was found in that case study. So the HPV-related cancers. Cervical cancer is one of the most well-known cancers linked to HPV, with 99% of the cases caused by the virus. Specifically, HPV 16 and HPV 18 are responsible for around 70% of cervical cases. HPV is also strongly associated with oropharyngeal cancer, where it accounts for about 70% of cases in the US. And with HPV being the most common strain. Additionally, HPV plays a significant role in the development of other cancers such as anal, vulvar, vaginal, and penile cancers. These cancers are also show a high association with HPV infections. So how does HPV infect? How does it enter the body? HPV leads, as we discussed, it leads to cancer of the epithelial tissue. Epithelial cells line the outer surfaces of organs, and they separate the interior of the body from external environment. In epithelial tissue, basal cells mature and divide. For HPV to cause an infection, it must enter the skin, typically through abrasions or wounds in the epithelial tissue. So here we would have an abrasion and coming through here. The deepest layer is the membrane, and above it sits the basal layer with the most consisting of squamous cells. HPV enters the skin and attaches to a receptor in the membrane known as the heparin sulfate receptor, which allows the virus to bind to the basal cells and inject its DNA into the nucleus. The virus essentially hijacks the basal cells, triggering cell growth in the infected epithelium, which eventually moves upward to the squamous layers. The HPV genome integrates into the host genome and expresses the oncoproteins E6 and E7, which we will discuss in the next slide. These proteins prevent the body from eliminating cells with damaged DNA, allowing the cancer cells to continue replicating. E6 and E7 are proteins that play a key role in the degradation of tumor suppressors within our cells. Specifically, HPV 16 targets and degrades P53, a crucial tumor suppressor preventing apoptosis and allowing cells to evade normal cell death mechanisms. In addition to this, E6 promotes the production of TERT, telomerase reverse transcriptase, which is responsible for extending the telomeres at the end of chromosomes. By increasing TERT expression, E6 can contribute to cellular immortality. In the next slide, I will present a research article exploring the connection deeper of TRT and cancer that I found particularly interesting. On the other hand, we have E7 that binds to the retinoblastoma and inactivates it, which is also critical for regulating the cell cycle and suppressing tumor formation. This targets the function of causing unregulated cell cycle progression. The study human papillomavirus E6 and E7, what remains, conducted by McMurray and McCain in year 2023, highlights that the continuous expression of both E6 and E7 in tumor cells is necessary to maintain the transformed phenotype and prevent tumor regression. On a cellular impact, they disrupt cellular process that maintain the stability of the genome and which lead to genetic mutation and chromosomal instability, which are crucial for cancer progression. Here we have a case study of HPV-16 E6 playing a key role in activating the TRT gene, which encodes the catalytic subunit of telomerase. HPV-16 E6 promotes TERT gene transcription, leading to increased activity in the telomerase, which is crucial for cancer progression. According to McMurray and McCain, 2003, E6 enhances TERT expression by inducing what is called CMYC. E6 upregulates the CMYC, a factor of transcription that activates the TERT promoter, and it displaces USF repressors. And by removing USF1 and USF2, the TRT promoter allowed transcriptional activation. So how can we raise awareness and prevent HPV? Well, for one, we can get vaccinated. Getting vaccinated prevents cervical cancer. The vaccine reduces highly the risk of developing cervical cancer caused by oncogenic strains as the ones we discussed, HPV-16 and 18. They also can help reduce other cancer. HPV-related cancers include anal, throat, penile, vulvar, and vaginal cancers. The CDC does recommend 2 doses of HPV vaccines at young ages, and they can be started very early on. Maria will now be going over Epstein-Barr virus with you.
Now, the second type of virus that we're going to talk about in our presentation is the Epstein-Barr virus, also known as EBV. And this type of virus belongs to the herpes virus family, especially the human herpes 4. And similar to its family, unfortunately, once you're infected with the virus, it's going to stay with you for life. This is a extremely common virus. In fact, most of the people will be infected at some point in their lives, usually during childhood or adolescence. Younger kids who are infected with the virus often don't display any type of symptoms, but the older we get, the more prone you are to start displaying visible viral symptoms. It is important to highlight that even though it is a common virus, it doesn't mean that it's not dangerous or that we shouldn't be taken seriously. And later in the presentation, you are going to see why we do have to pay attention to this type of infections. The main illnesses that EBV is known for is the kissing disease. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this term, but I come from a Hispanic household and we call it la enfermedad del beso. And when we are around newborn babies, or grandmas or moms are often going to say, "Oh, please don't kiss the baby." And that is because we want to avoid infecting newborns with EBV. This virus is referred, in fact, as the Kaycian disease because its main source of spreading is through saliva, which is why we should try to avoid sharing drinks or drinking from the same container. And however, it's not that common. There has been reported cases that EBV has also spread through organ transplants or even blood transfusions. Now, like I mentioned before, it's a very common virus, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be taken seriously. And it's so common that by the time that we have reached adulthood, approximately 90 to 95% of the population in the entire world will have been affected by the virus. And due to the fact that it's so common, it makes it a topic of research, especially because it can cause long-term complications such as cancer. And later on in the presentation, we are going to see exactly how this virus can affect the cancer production cells. Now, depending on your geography or what part of the world you live in, it is going to determine how early in your life you're more prone to contracting the virus. For example, in developing countries, more of the cases have been seen from younger kids. And as I mentioned before, they usually don't experience visible symptoms. So most of the time, these cases might go undetected. Now, in contrast, in first world countries like Canada, some countries in Europe, or the US, infections are more common on older people. And in this case, those cases are more prone to experience visible viral symptoms such as fever, runny nose, fatigue, and all of those. And the sad part about it is that this is not a seasonal virus. Unlike the flu that we can say, oh, it's mostly common during winter season, with EBV, that's not the case, and it's not associated to any season of the year. Now, there has been shown that Epstein-Barr virus is actually related to some type of cancers. And the first one is going to be Burkitt lymphoma, which is a type of B-cell non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And this type of cancer can particularly be seen in endemic regions like Sub-Saharan Africa, and is most common in children, and it's often related to malaria, which makes sense because malaria will lower the immune system, making more prone to suffer from EBV-related cancers. The second one that is associated with EBV is the Hodgkin lymphoma, and is most common in early patient. And in this type of cancer, EBV virus is actually present in the tumor cell, which suggests that the virus is involved in the process of developing those cancer cells. The third cancer linked to EBV is nasopharyngeal carcinoma, which is located in the upper part of your throat, behind your nose, and it is especially common seen in Southeast Asia, Southern China, and also other parts of North Africa. So now, how does a EBV contribute to cancer, and what is the molecular mechanism? So we have to understand that first EBV gets established in B cells, where it expresses only a limited set of genes to avoid immune detection, meaning that our body doesn't know that the virus is there. And during this process, it actively affects the survival of healthy cells on those systems that eventually allows the virus to evade immune destruction, meaning that if our body doesn't know it's there, of course, it can attack the virus. So it's gonna go undetected. And some oncogenic proteins and RNAs encoded in EBV include the EVNA1, which inhibits P55, which is a tumor suppressor protein, allowing damaged DNA to survive. It also presents of latent membrane proteins, or LMPs, such as LMP1, which turn on several cancer promoting pathways, such as the NFK, NFKB, which is going to be in charge of promoting cell survival, and also P13K or AKT, which promotes cell growth and inhibits apoptosis. Now, there are various types of infections when it comes to the virus, and the most common one is going to be the asymptomatic one. And like I mentioned before, it usually occurs in younger children. People often don't show any symptoms, but they do carry the virus. The second one is going to be the mono infection. And this one is going to occur in older adults, and they are more likely to develop this type of infection, which includes symptoms such as fatigue, sore throat, fever, and also swollen lymph nodes. The third one is going to be chronic active EBV, and these type of cases are very, very rare, and not many get reported, but during this type of infection, it is going to be very, very dangerous. It's long lasting and it can cause recurring symptoms over time, and it can also involve several organ failure. And finally, the last one is going to be latent infection, which is one of the most serious type of the infections because a person is infected with the virus, is going to stay in your system forever, and it becomes dormant in B cells, affecting your immune system forever. And most of the time, the virus can live in the host cell while being unnoticed, but under certain conditions, and let's say that you have a weak immune system, it can actually reactivate with time, and it can unfortunately lead to death at the end of the day. Some of the impact that a vaccination can have, unfortunately, we don't know for sure because to this day, we don't have an approved vaccine against this virus. However, we can assume that one of the benefits of having one might include the prevention of monoinfection, which is the one that actually causes symptoms in the host. The second benefit that it can bring to the table is that it can actually help in the prevention of certain type of cancers, and we will be able to see in the future lower rates of nasopharyngeal carcinoma, of the Hodgkin lymphoma, and also Burkitt lymphoma. And then lastly, we can just get a vaccine that could limit the overall transmission. I mean, since this type of virus it actually goes undetected, it's very easily transmitted, especially among children. Therefore, having a vaccine that can limit the number of transmissions can really impact our society and retain the virus for further spread.
Hello, my name is Kaycia, and I will be discussing HIV, which is also called human immunodeficiency virus. What is HIV? HIV is an immune deficiency virus that attacks the body's immune system. The first case was discovered in 1985, and it specifically targets the T cells, which inherently weakens our immune system over time. HIV is transmitted through blood, vaginal fluid, breast milk, and sharing needles. It is not transferred through sweat, saliva, or tears. If left untreated, HIV can lead to cancer, such as HPV, and cause viral infections like AIDS, which has no cure. Symptoms of HIV are similar to other illnesses, such as a common cold or a slight stomach bug. These symptoms include fever, chills, muscle pain, sore throat, swollen lymph nodes, fatigue, night sweats, ulcers, and joint pain. Anyone can get HIV. It doesn't matter the age, race, or sex of the person. The molecular makeup of HIV. The molecular makeup of HIV consists of the outside cell containing GP120 and the inside that holds the RNA of the virus. GP120 of HIV binds to CD4 and CCR5 receptors of our T cells, and HIV enters through endocytosis. HIV RNA then enters the cytoplasm of T cells, and RT synthesis occurs, which creates a complementary DNA strand of the virus. This strand binds to the nucleus of T cells, which then undergoes transcription, which results in viral RNA of HIV. This viral RNA serves as the new genome for the virus to be used to communicate with messenger RNA to continue the replication cycle of the virus. The virus leaves the cell through exocytosis. This repeated action continues without knowledge of the host. And now the HIV virus has an altered GP120, which changes the code receptor CCR5 to CXCR4, which inherently causes cell wall of T cells to rupture, which leads to symptoms that disturb the immune system. These symptoms can then cause illnesses such as pneumonia or tuberculosis due to the reduction of the immune system being able to react to viruses quickly. Currently, there are no cure for HIV. However, there are preventative measures available to reduce harm to the body. The use of ARI, antiretroviral medication, is used during the ongoing treatment to prevent HIV from turning into AIDS. Other cancer preventative measures, such as going in for routine checkups, using condoms, and not sharing needles, can help reduce the transmission of HIV. There is a heavy stigma linked to HIV. However, HIV does not discriminate, and it can lead to further complications, which can cause cancers such as HPV and other viral infections. By educating people of all ages and demographics by implementing testing centers can help reduce the number of HIV patients each year. HIV-1 is the most common cause of AIDS, and HIV plays a part in many other viral illnesses that can be caught when the immune system has been affected.
Hello, so just to summarize everything, we took a look at infections and their relationship to cancer. Okay, specifically, we looked at HPV, EBV, and HIV. In this last portion, we're going to go over the key takeaways of each and also overall real-world impact, future directions, and re-emphasize prevention methods. For HPV and cancer, okay, so HPV is one of the most common STIs with 13 high-risk strains that are directly linked to cancer. More specifically, the most notable are HPV 16 and 18, which are responsible for 70% of cervical cancers. You have a closer look here. They're involved directly in the development of these precancerous lesions on various organs, first and foremost, the cervix. However, HPV cancer can occur all of these places. So you have the cervical cancer that could occur, anal cancer, penile cancer, vulvar cancer, vaginal, and orthopharyngeal cancer from HPV. Here, we're taking a closer look at the cervix and the progression of the HPV infection. To the left, you can see a healthy cervix, and that was then infected with the HPV virus, okay? So after a persistent infection of the virus, you have cellular changes, and after the invasion occurs and persists for 5 to 20 years, you go ahead and that's when you get this uncontrolled cell growth, which leads to your cervical cancer. And research studies show that was mentioned earlier that specifically the E6 proteins that come along with this HPV are maybe what's activating the TERT gene, increasing telomerase activity, which is what ultimately led to that uncontrolled cell growth. Just to reiterate, the pathway is the E6 and E7 proteins that are the most highlighted in these strains, with the E6 degrading the P53 pathway, but the E7 activating the RB pathway. Moving on to EBV overview and its direct link to cancer. We know here now that 90% of people worldwide have EBV, but one of the reasons why it is so sneaky is because EBV can lie dormant in B cells, but it can contribute to several cancers under the right conditions. The cancers that EBV is primarily linked to is Burkitt lymphoma, Hodgkin lymphoma, and nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Burkitt lymphoma is one of the classic examples of co-infection factors that contribute to EBV developing into cancer, particularly in malaria endemic regions like sub-Saharan Africa, which you see here on the screen. It's been found that many cases of Hodgkin lymphoma that are associated with your carcinoma are coming from these factors where malaria is higher in these regions due to just overall the presence. So, but unlike HPV, EBV remains in a latent state and can reactivate if immune system is compromised. The silent persistence makes it particularly difficult to control, especially in immunosuppressed populations, going back to your sub-Saharan Africa, where malaria is higher. Your immune system, when you have malaria, is so focused on that, it's compromised. When you have HIV, your immune system is compromised. So we see that here with EBV. Going into HIV, HIV is unique in that it weakens the immune system and increases the risk for oncogenic viruses related to cancer. The associated cancers of HIV are Kaposi sarcoma, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and cervical cancer. So HIV oftentimes enhances oncogenic potential for other HPV viruses. For other viruses like HPV and EBV due to the compromised immune system that comes along with HIV. We're going to do an overall overview of common themes across these oncoviruses and kind of zoom out and talk about the similarities. So overall, the mechanisms of these different viruses, they come with cell disruption, apoptosis avoidance, and chronic inflammation in the cellular and biological environment. So these oncoproteins, as you can see here on the right with our graph, they disrupt common pathways in the cell. Specifically, we can go back to E6, which targets P53 and dysregulates cell function. And overall, the line is oncogenes affect the pathways. They cause cellular dysregulation, and they inhibit apoptosis, which then leads to transformation, which then ultimately gives in to tumor formation. Viral oncoproteins hijack host machinery for replication and transformation. So when you have the environment, when you have the infection, it leads to the cancer risk. Some real world impact in future directions. So prevention and intervention are already making an impact. The HPV vaccine is one of the best examples of this. Studies have shown that cervical cancer rates have dropped significantly in countries with strong vaccination programs. So when you hear me say this, hear it well. Vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. It's a wonderful tool in prevention. There's also in the future a dire need for EBV vaccines, which could, like we were going over earlier, prevent lymphomas and carcinoma. We also need an increase in public health and public health awareness. So your vaccination, screening, and education also goes a long way. Aside from that, globally, aside from the global real-world impact and future directions, we also need targeted region-based interventions, because from region to region it differs. It's going to be a different plan of action in North America versus in South Africa, where you have just different resources and things in that nature. So we can't cure it. We haven't cured it. I won't say can't, but in lieu of that, prevention is better than cure. You know what I mean? Because when you prevent and you teach and you educate it, it's such a wonderful tool. So at the moment, we can't cure, but we can prevent. So I kind of outlined some of the basic day-to-day things that you could take away with you right now today for outlook. And it's the solutions are simpler than you think. And because they're so simple, you know, they're oftentimes overlooked. But some of the prevention methods that we can include are: don't use tobacco products. It significantly increases your chances of cancer development. Protecting your skin, so that's wearing your SPF, reapplying. I use SPF once in the morning and I forget to reapply. I could do it more. You know, get vaccinated. So your HPV vaccines are going to go a really long way in helping protect you against some of those 13 high-risk strains. Eat healthier. You know, certain vitamins have been known to significantly decrease your chances of cancer formation. And also, practicing safe sex is one of the most important things that I would like to preach, because your HIV, HPV, hepatitis, different things like that are primarily transmitted through sexual interaction. So practicing safe sex can be a wonderful first step in decreasing your risk to contract the virus, which is highly related to cancerous development. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation and prevention methods. Here we have listed our citations. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. Have a good one.